Lawyers, what is the most shocking case you have worked on? A quick content warning for this one in this thread. There are multiple mentions of murdering, abusing, stuff like that. If for any reason you don't want to hear about any of that, it's all good. Here's your warning to click off the video. That being said, here we go. I normally defend construction defect and personal injury matters. Nothing too crazy. Early in my career, we got a case involving a husband and wife who ran a foster home, and one kid was alleging the husband had abused them. I was assigned to defend only the wife under their homeowner's insurance policy. The allegations against the husband were bad, but the wife had no idea what was going on. Here was this poor woman, who was also a former foster child, trying to give back and help other foster children in the system, and now she finds out her husband is a child abuser. It was heartbreaking, and we just wanted to get her out of the case. Then we get more documents and learn this isn't the first child to make allegations. The dad had been doing this shit for years, and she knew it. Maybe she was involved. Maybe she just ignored it. Either way, the whole thing turned gross. I instantly wanted nothing to do with it. A few weeks later, my boss, the coolest guy ever, comes in and says he gave the case back to the insurance carrier, thank God. That was the only case I've ever felt morally opposed to handling. I should also clarify that once a lawyer takes on a case, it's not that easy to just say, actually, I changed my mind. I don't know what my boss did to get rid of that case, but I'm glad he was equally grossed out. Commenter: I'm actually in a situation somewhat similar to this. In 2019, I was in a mental facility for 4 months, and they had asked me if I was ever assaulted, and I told them about what my mom's boyfriend at the time had done to me, molested me, and they contacted my mother about it, and she completely denied it. She told them I was lying and asked me why I hadn't told her after it had happened. BC, I knew she wouldn't believe me, just like she didn't then. They never did anything about him, but now, my mom has gotten a new boyfriend. We live with him, and he has like 6 or 7 kids, but he doesn't own any of them. BC, he was in prison. I woke up one early ass morning to find this man spooning me from behind, rubbing my ass and my thigh. I was scared, so I just pretended that I was still asleep. He stayed there for a good 10 minutes, then finally left. He didn't try to do anything further than that, but it still really f***ed with my head. DK if I'm overreacting or not, but I know if I tell, I won't be believed. Story 2. I was clerking at the time. Little kid fight club. Bunch of moms put their kids in a circle and made them fight each other gladiator style. Real dark stuff. Video included 2 girls beating the crap out of each other. Bets were taken, but not on all fights. Some were just for entertainment. No fathers involved. Story 3. A mother sold the family farm out from under the son who was supposed to inherit it. Someone shot her, non-fatally. There were so many suspects that almost every lawyer in the county was assigned to defend one of them. Forensics eventually narrowed it down to 2 suspects, but each so adamantly pointed at the other as the shooter that it was going to be hard to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt of either one's guilt. They both pleaded guilty to a lesser charge and served 2 years. Story 4. Lady wanted to show me her pussy. It just happened to not be attached to her body. I already told one shocking story in this thread, but I got another that is a different kind of shocking. I was pretty new to the practice and was meeting with a lot of clients. The firm I worked for had a lot of walk-ins, and I was processing the potential clients. I called in the next person, and a mid-30s woman walked in carrying a red and white cooler. She pops in down on my desk, and this spends about 5 mins trying to sit down in the chair. My first thought was, must be some kind of personal injury. First words out of her mouth after she sits, I need to sue my doctor because my pussy just fell out. My eyes immediately lock onto the cooler. Is that? Yes, I brought in with my just in case you needed to see it. Do you want to see it? She begins to open the cooler. Not gonna lie, I was curious, but I stopped her and convinced her that a hospital was her best option at the moment. Turns out she had pussy reconstruction and the mesh came out in one big blob. Now, this is not my area of expertise. I am a corporate attorney, so I sent her to someone with more expensive. Story 5. I used to work as a legal secretary for a personal injury lawyer. He told me about a case where his client had radiation burns from an X-ray machine. In the avalanche of documents he received from the defendant during discovery, he found an internal memo. The memo described a serious problem with the machines and continued, "This is an issue we can't ignore. Unfortunately, it's not in the budget." When the case went to trial, he told the jury, "Show them they need to put this in the budget next time." The jury complied, handing down one of the largest verdicts California had ever seen. Story 6. I'm an attorney, but the case that stuck with me most was one I sat in on during undergrad. I was a criminal justice major and frequently had to go watch trials for class assignments. I was in the military at the time, so I had to cram these hours in randomly. If we had a light day, or I could take a long lunch, I would go to the closest courthouse and check what was available. One day I went down to the federal courthouse in Baltimore and checked the list. One criminal case. Nothing else going. I head upstairs and quietly walk in. Despite that, clearly everyone checks me out, which is odd. Usually no one pays attention to the gallery. At the first break, a guy comes over and asks me who I am and why I'm there. Key's Office of Special Investigations with the air for E, so I show him my ID and explain I have to watch criminal trials. He gives me a weird look but doesn't push. As I'm sitting there, I slowly realize I should not be here. Air Force couple has a son, gets divorced. She takes son with her to her duty station in Japan and remarries a civilian employee there. Dad is deployed and then moves station and keeps bugging her about when he can see the son. At some point, she just stops responding. A few months later, after Dad has filed a report with her command requesting they make her communicate with him, Dad gets a call from an OSI agent who he knows, asking him for his son's full name and DOB. Dad gives it to him. An agent says, "Look, I didn't tell you this, but you need to call OSI on her base." Mom had gone to the field, and son had been bugging the stepdad while he was gaming. Stepdad got pissed off at beat the kid with the first thing to hand, a piece of banister from the stair he was working in. Mom came back from the field 2 days later and found the son unconscious, still on the floor. Because stepdad's last home of record was in Maryland, he was tried in federal court in Baltimore. I sat through the ear doc who treated the son, who talked about seeing the internal crush injuries, and the coroner who talked about how hard you would have to hit a boy on the front to cause bruising on his back. I also sat through the dad talking about finding out his son was gone. After that day, I always went to misdemeanor court for my hours. Story 7. I was dating a nice woman back in 2016. In our first conversation, I asked her what she did for a living. She was a paralegal for a malpractice firm at the time. I asked her if there were any interesting cases happening. She said, "Yes, one we are going to lose." I was interested. I asked what happened. She told me, "Well, we are defending a doctor who made a mistake. One of his patients was suffering from an eye condition that required a unique recovery. After surgery, the patient had to lie face down for the entirety of their day to prevent further eye damage. It had something to do with eye pressure and a gas buildup near the back of the eye. As it turns out, the patient wanted to fly on a plane and would intend to keep their eyes down through the whole flight. The doctor we're defending didn't tell the patient that they couldn't fly during the recovery. The next part definitely sucked. When the patient took off on the plane, everything was okay. During descent, which people with ear problems can attest, the rapid change in pressure f***ed up this patient's condition. They went completely blind in both eyes due to the descent of the plane. Predictably, the doctor did lose the case. It was definitely an interesting first conversation to have with someone. Story 8. A girls' basketball team from an Indian reservation in the upper Midwest went to play in the statewide YMCA League championship game against a non-native team from a town bordering the reservation, so lots of bad blood. The res team was unsurprisingly severely underfunded, and the girls were from very underprivileged homes. They get to the game, and right before tip-off, the other team accuses them of having boys on their team and demands that the refs verify that they are all female, or else they will file a formal complaint and walk off the court. The YMCA refs, 2 non-natives, then agree with the challenge and tell the res girls team they must comply or they will be considered a forfeit. The res team coach gets cowed and asks the girls to comply. They do, and each one is required to essentially open their shorts at the waistband to prove they are not male to these refs in the locker room. They are humiliated and mortified, and many end up suffering PTSD and have long-term mental health injuries. The case got thrown out of court on a technicality. Flo, I was a law clerk on the case, not the actual first chair attorney. Absolutely heartbreaking for these girls, and disgusting racially motivated hatred from the non-native team side of things was all over the evidentiary record. Still makes me ill to think of what all transpired and what all of these shitty adults did to those poor girls. Story 9. I'm an immigration lawyer. I do mostly VAWA and asylum, but I handle other stuff on occasion. I had a prospective client come in a few weeks ago. He's interested in pursuing a relatively straightforward application. He tells me that he might have a criminal history that could affect his immigration. It's only one arrest, though, he says. It happened in 19XX, and it's not serious. Okay, I say. It happens. Nobody's perfect. And a single arrest is generally not a deal breaker. So, as I'm talking with him, I decide to Google his pretty unique name. A news article comes up from his country in his language. It's dated the same year he said 19X. Chem. I ask him, "What kind of crime did you say it was?" "Oh," he says, "I think it was substances related." I figure, all right, weed arrest or something. Nothing we can't overcome. I click through to the article. The photo on the article sure looks like a lot like the prospective client. Turns out, prospective client's arrest was not for WD at all. It was for white powder, and not a little white powder. This guy was caught attempting to smuggle X pallets of this substances. I must have looked a little bug-eyed because the guy gave me a sort of sheepish look and a shrug. Jim, I tell the prospective client maybe we should start by filing a few FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, to see what comes up, and we'll go from there. He agrees, and that's that. I'll double-check my suspicions against the government record and let the client know what can or cannot be done. Suffice it to say, getting caught smuggling multiple pallets of CIA is not a small-time arrest, but you never know what is or isn't true, and you should always do your due diligence. Here's another one. Client of mine is an extremely nice guy. He was a green card, permanent residence applicant, and worked on a fishing boat in Alaska. When he's out on the boats, though, fishing for crab or whatever, there's no way for anybody to communicate with him, and he's out there for months at a time. Phone calls and letters aren't reaching anybody out in the middle of the Bering Strait. One such a time when he was out there, he apparently got beaded all the way through the chest with a huge hook thing in a freak accident. Nobody stateside knew, of course. The client was taken, somehow, to the hospital and survived, but I didn't hear from him for literal months. Well, the USCIS, United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, happens to issue this guy an interview notice. He's nowhere to be found. The USCIS mark him absent for his interview. I try to reach out to him, but cannot find him. The USCIS then denies this poor guy's case. But it gets worse. He calls me about a month later. He tells me all about the hook on the ship, but also tells me that after he got home from the hospital, his wife was upset that he didn't earn her any money due to his injury, and then basically beat the hell out of him with a baseball bat, took all of his money and things, and left him for dead. What? So he's back in the hospital. This guy was like the single most mild-mannered, nicest guy ever. I ended up putting in huge amounts of unpaid work for months to turn this guy's application around. We switched up his green card application and filed a self-petition through the Violence Against Women Act. That was its own fiasco, but not nearly as interesting a story. We ended up getting his green card approved in what felt like a miracle, and he's now back in Alaska, happily fishing and living his best life. He still calls me once in a while just to say hello and thank you. Such a nice guy. Immigration work is brutal, exhausting, and soul-sapping, but sometimes you do something really good for somebody who really deserves it, and that makes it all worthwhile. Story 10. I'm not a lawyer, but I worked in a foreclosure mediation diversion court as a counselor. Usually it was people with bad luck, unemployment, or addiction that lead them there. Heavy stuff, but became run-of-the-mill. One guy I will never forget. He comes in, and at first it looks like a standard unemployment deal. There are programs with mortgage companies to deal with. He was a dock worker, made pretty good money, but hadn't worked for 6 months and was about to lose the house. I ask for his story, and he tells me it all started 20 years ago. His older son was in the army in Korea at a base on deployment, and his younger son was at a high school party in their town. Apparently, he gets into it with another kid over a girl, and the kid grabs a barbecue fork and beat the son in the neck. His youngest passed away before an ambulance arrives. The older son is devastated because he wasn't there to protect his brother. The father and mother end up divorcing over the grief, but older son returns, makes a life, has a couple young kids, and it all seems good. But 6 months prior, he just walks into his garage and died. Leaves a note that he can't live with not having been there for his baby brother even after all these years. So my client goes into a depressive state, stops working, stops paying bills. Just can't deal with the grief and destruction of his family that one event emanated. What pulled him out of almost died was that the guy who killed the younger son came up for parole. He went and spoke against him getting out and then realized he had to live for his grandkids. I still think about that dude regularly. Grief is so powerful it pulsates out and destroys if you don't have the right support. Story 11. I'm not a lawyer, but I work closely with a lot of lawyers and see the same stuff they do. There was a case where a lady had been a victim of kidnapped in her home country and was sent into an escorts ring in the US. She escaped, applied for asylum, told the FBI and whatnot everything she knew about her kidnappers and the others who bought her, putting her life in major danger, and was told that's all it would take to get her asylum and permanent residency taken care of. Still tried to deport her. Don't worry. She won her case, but only because one of the top attorneys in New York, if you know of a lot of attorneys in NYC, you've probably heard about this one, took the case on pro bono. It was wild to me how hard ICE fought to get her sent back and how intense that case got. Story 12? Okay, obligatory, not my story, and technically not a case he worked on, but a shocking story about the legal system. So get ready for a tangentially related story. So my brother is a lawyer. One day he's T-boned at an intersection. Turns out the guy who hit him was FBI. It's apparently procedure when an FBI agent gets in a car accident. Their punishment is that they have to work the next FBI car accident's paperwork. So there's my brother talking to this FBI agent working the accident, and they hit it off. It comes out that my father and uncle are both former law enforcement, so they start talking about cases they've worked on. The FBI agent tells my brother that he was on scene at the 97 North Hollywood bank shootout, which took place right down the street from where my brother lived at the time. So my brother straight up asks him, those guys, robbers that were shot, did the ambulances really not get there in time? The FBI guy looks to him and basically tells him, those ambulances and paramedics weren't led anywhere near those guys until they died. Story 13, not a lawyer, but a translator. I once translated this text about a case Basically, this mother's kid set her house on fire whilst she left the USA to China to cremate her husband, who died of terminal disease. The kid literally burned everything, all her life savings. Then the daughter went on to tell lies to all her family members in China, saying how the mother is just accusing her. Was rough translating, especially because the mother left to the USA in the 1990s. Worked her ass off, only to let her husband suffer years of disease and her daughter to burn her house down. Story 14. Back in the day, I investigated and later in my career prosecuted lots of arsons, so I worked a lot of fire cases. One time, the crews roll up on a garage fire. They are met by the home's resident holding a blood-soaked towel to his crotch. The medics get him stable and transported. He later tells us the voice told him to eat a whole box of saltine crackers without drinking any water, and he was like, okay, and did that. Then the voice told him to eat the newspaper, and he was like, check. Then the voice said, set the van on fire in the garage, and he was like, you got it. He did all those things in that order, and there were the scene photos of the testicles right there on the garage floor. We got him into mental health court, and he did pretty well. Story 15. Client paid a multi-million-dollar settlement with a handwritten personal check. He was pissed and refused to do a wire transfer like a normal person. I think the other side had to scramble to find a bank to deposit the check. Banking regulations limit how much money a bank can hold on deposit. You just can't take a check that large to any local bank. The check eventually cleared, so I guess they figured it out. Good times. That case will be on my resume for sure. Story 16. Slayer statute. Interpleader case in federal court. Client murdered her husband to collect insurance proceeds. Found out that she promised to pay 2 dudes to bind his hands and feet with duct tape, execute him in an alley for $20K each, to be paid out of the insurance funds. She lost. Story 17. I was defending a guy who was charged with theft of property and breaking and entering. The DA offered a plea deal of 18 months in prison. He said he couldn't be away from his family for 18 months. Guy had some priors, and trial could cost him to be gone away a lot longer, but he insisted on taking it to trial. We strike a jury, and he comes to the first day of trial. Surprisingly, the DA was still offering the 18 months right before trial started. The evidence against him was overwhelming. I told him so, but he wanted to take it to trial. We get through the first day, and on the second day, he doesn't show up. The judge said to finish the trial without him, to which I argued against, but we still had it. The jury found him guilty, and they swore out a warrant for him. Later on that day, I found out he hung himself overnight. He just couldn't stand to be away from his family for 18 months. That messed me up for a little while. Yes, died. Story 18. I will answer for my lawyer friend because he used the words, "This is the most terrible case I've ever worked." Basically, my friend is a prosecutor with the DA's office and was assigned to girl abuse. The defendant was the girl's stepfather. The abuse happened from the time the girl was 14 to 16. She's 17 now and testified to all the things her stepfather did over those 5 years. The shucked part came when the defense attorney tried to blame the girl for allowing everything to happen to her. And of course, since the girl is now a very attractive teenager, used the "she was just too beautiful," the stepfather couldn't control himself defense. My friend was watching the jury while the defense was cross-examining the girl and saw so many head nods as though the jury agreed with the idea that a girl in 8 to 10 the grade allowed herself had happened. Thankfully, the jury did decide to convict the stepfather, but it took a lot of work, partly for myself, as the girl's therapist and expert witness on abuse and delayed outcries, for the jury to convict. I think both my friend and I lost a little bit faith in humanity that day, both after hearing the defense and seeing certain jury members agree with the idea that a child consented to any kind of abuse. Now the girl and I are having to continue therapy. While she's done an incredible job working through the abuse, she's now exhibiting trauma symptoms from testifying in court. Story 19. I was an intern at the time for the public defender's office and witnessed a pretty good one. 2 guys walk into a liquor store. One of them is packing a revolver. They shove around the old store clerk and get him to open up the registers. After looting all the cash, the robbers walk out of the store to their car. The store clerk, who I think was also the owner, then goes to get his gun and makes chase. He manages to pop off a few shots at the robbers as they wheel away with great haste. Now, there were 2 cops in the same shopping center. They were responding to a stabbing at a nearby AA meeting, and they hear the gunshots and see a car speeding away. As they turn the corner, they see the old man with firearm in hand pointing down the road after the car. They yell in order to, "Freeze! Put down your weapon!" or something to that effect. The old man makes the mistake of turning before putting down the gun, so the cops then open fire. The clerk is shot 3 times by the cops, but fortunately not fatally. 2 to the torso and 1 that takes off his trigger finger. Good shot, I guess. The robbers later crash a few blocks down the road, as the clerk was also a pretty good shot and managed to hit the getaway driver in the leg, causing him to pass out at the wheel due to blood loss. Story 20. Not a lawyer, but I got a summer gig once sorting and alphabetizing case files at a law firm and throwing out the files that were more than 7 years old. This necessitated going through them occasionally to find the closure dates. The saddest one I picked up was a 19-year-old boy who got sent to jail for having sex with a girl younger than him. Not that I think it's okay for a 19-year-old to have sex with a girl younger than him. That's really pushing it, to put it mildly. What made me sad was the way that the prosecutors procured a confession. It was one of those, if you write a nice apology letter to her parents, maybe we can make this all go away, manipulated written confessions. It was this heartfelt letter that was all, I'm so sorry I put your family through this hardship. I wasn't thinking, it was irresponsible, etc. And it just had this soulless, sticky note on it that just said, confessed in all caps. I read lots of interesting case files, but that one was a gut punch. The kid did some time for that one. Story 21. Not a lawyer, but we got sued and had to pay out money for absolutely no reason, besides cheaper to pay then off than actually defend yourself. So let me give you the facts. We bought a property in 2014. It had tenants in it. Remember 2014? It is important. So one of the tenants had an issue that made her unit partially uninhabitable in 2011. The property management takes a while to get it fixed, but they resolved the issue in 2011. Fast forward to 2016. The tenant is now suing the previous owners and us. We hadn't even heard of this property when it happened, or even when the situation was resolved, but we were added to the case. Eventually, we had an arbiter talking between all three parties. The tenant was asking us for $20K, but we brought it down to $10K. Our attorneys recommended we settle, and so we did. Now, you're probably asking why we even paid. We bore no responsibility, right? You'd be right, but it would have cost us at least $10K to pay our attorneys to defend us in court. And even then, there is no guarantee a jury would rule in our favor. It was best to pay her off and call it a day. Her attorney, on the other hand, was one that worked off the proceeds of his case. He cost nothing unless he won. Then he would take like 75% of whatever they won tilde. Tilde, apparently the attorney would take 30%, and the other fees would take another 45%, leaving the tenant with 25%. Many people abuse the system with these tiny cases because it isn't even worth defending against. On a final note, we also stipulated the tenant had to vacate the property within 5 months. We only did this because her pregnant adult daughter was about 7 months pregnant. Come the end of the 5 months, she asked if she could continue her tenancy. Really, after you sue us for no reason but to earn a quick buck? No. And damn the attorney who took her case. Story 22? Not a lawyer, but my aunt was. She was the state prosecutor for a case where a guy had gotten into an argument with another guy at a recreational baseball game. After the game was over, one guy left and went home. The other guy stayed at the baseball field with his son. About like 30 minutes to an hour later, they are still at the baseball field, and the other guy is back. He has a baseball bat and walks straight towards the dad at the pitching mound and starts hitting him over the head with the bat, kid frozen in terror while this guy beating his dad. He then walks over to the kid and does the same thing to him. My aunt was amazing at her job and got the guy sentenced to life in prison. She lost her battle to disease a few months ago. I loved listening to her stories. She was the best aunt a guy could ask for. Story 23. Not a lawyer, but I work for the DA in my area. Part of my job is digitizing old evidence. Animal abuse is never fun. The worst was definitely the 18-year-old victim who was left in a field for 4 months before they found her. I had to make sure all those crime scene and autopsy photos are scanned in properly, too. Can't have them too blurry or miss one. Close second is the father that beat his daughter half to death with an extension cord who had the family rally around him and pony up the bail immediately after arraignment. They didn't give a shit about the girl. Story 24. I'm an interpreter, not an attorney, but I had a school case to interpret regarding bullying. The school decided to have a court case decision made in-house. It was 12 kids and their parents on a stage in the cafeteria. The school officials were there and a school advocate who acted as judge. Apparently, the seniors would trap the freshmen in a designated bathroom after lunch and jump them. 4 seniors and 8 freshmen who were beat up individually. There were supposed to be 9, but one was in the hospital. They showed surveillance of how the seniors picked the freshmen to beat up, and there were 2 teachers aware of this. In one of the videos, one of the teachers helped the seniors by pointing out who the freshmen were. This was a hazing technique that was going on in the school for years. But this case was to make an example of those involved. The teachers involved were only mentioned when the bullies admitted receiving assistance and pointing out who to beat up. The teachers never got in trouble. Only one bully was expelled and all the freshmen were suspended. It was unjust and sad. This case went on for 3 days, and each case lasted 3 to 5 hours after school. Story 25. A labor case in which, in the middle of the hearing, the judge, 60 years old male, start to flirt with my client, 23 years old female, in a direct, straightforward way. It was so shocking that was one of the only cases I got speechless in a trial. Those hearings are closed here in Brazil, so no jury, no recording, nothing. Story 26. I had to fight the VA since I got medically discharged from the Coast Guard because of a kidney disease that I got while I was in, and the VA rated me at 0% for that same condition. Took me 5 years to get them to understand that I got discharged from the Coast Guard because of it. Story 27. Oh, a family law matter. I was a newly minted attorney who couldn't find work in the early 2010s and took anything that came to me. Custody battle. I represented mom. Dad lived with his grandfather, who had been convicted twice of abuse's other grandchildren. Easy case, right? No, because mom absolutely forbade me from bringing grandfather's convictions before the judge. Said he made some mistakes. And while she wanted full custody, of course, she felt bad that grandfather's past mistakes might be used against him in the future, forever. I brought it up to the judge anyway. She fired me on the spot during oral arguments. She ended up suing me. It was a d***ing mess. Would do it again. Story 28. Did an alleged arson case for an insurance company once. The insured had to provide a list of all items he had lost, including over 1,000 book titles. Every book was the biography of a serial killer. We figured it was probably every book ever written about a serial killer. Insured gave off serious, dark, and mysterious vibes. Who knows the truth? Story 29. My mom's ex-boyfriend had to defend a triple murder with kidnapping. 2 of the victims were a mother and her 3-year-old son. Defendant had some kind of psychosis, I'm not sure what. He attempted to carjack a 4th victim who was able to overpower him, leading to his arrest. Said ex-boyfriend switched to prosecution after that. Story 30. My stepdad is a lawyer, criminal defense and family. He was approached by the family of Yolanda Saldivar to appeal her case, but he declined due to the fact that so much time has passed and the evidence has been destroyed. Story 31. So, I see a lot of messed up injuries in my line of work. Personal injury, like permanent metal in people, scars, mental trauma, videos of car accidents, broken bones, messed up stuff. But what gets me the most is health insurance companies. Basically, let's say you have Kaiser. You get hurt, they pay the bill. Unfortunately, if you get hurt by another person and recover funds from them, then your health insurance company, or workers' comp, is entitled to be paid back from the money you get. Oh, and the government gets first dibs too if you have Medicare or state-funded health insurance. However bad you think the system is working, trust me, it's worse. Story 32. Not a lawyer, but a paralegal. We had a client who claimed to be the daughter of a man, but his other daughter claimed that wasn't true. The man's estate went to probate court, and they both had rival petitions going to be the administrator, which in California you get money for along with your share of the estate. She was a nut, and my boss regretted taking her on every time we had to deal with her, and after her trying to exhume the body, breaking into his house to gather evidence, and sending us on a wild goose chase to family members in Arkansas who would vouch for her, claiming the decedent always said our client was his daughter. Cut to a month later, we get a call from our client. The police are outside her house. She's barricaded in and has a gun to her husband. She won't come out. She keeps calling our office to talk to her attorney, who is not in that day, and I'm talking to her teller and watching the police on the news at the same time. She ended up beating her husband, not killing him, but leaving him a vegetable, and she went to jail. Never found out if she was the real daughter or not. Story 33. Legal videographer here. Grandparent custody case where the dad got photographed abusing daughter under the Christmas tree. Kid goes for a medical exam and the doc reports extensive injuries usually associated with abuse. Then checks a box to indicate the injuries were not related to abuse. Police say nothing they can do about it because of the checked box. The mom commits die, and the person holding the gun when she's shot gets a misdemeanor year. Police lose 2 polygraph tests and a couple abuse kits. Grandparents lose custody case. Oh, his dad was a magistrate in the same county. And the dad gets full custody. Unfortunately, story 34. I was just an articling student at the time, but we got a phone call that still makes me laugh each time I think about it. A woman calls in asking for advice on immigration law. I tell her I can't give advice, but I can take details and book a meeting. She wants to know about claiming refugee status. I ask her where she is a refuge from. She then tells me that she doesn't want to claim refuge status. Her sister does. So I ask her where her sister is from. She tells me from Hong Kong. This was almost a decade ago, BTW. So I ask her why she is fleeing Hong Kong. She tells me that her sister isn't fleeing Hong Kong. She is visiting on a 6-month visa. So I ask why she wants to help her sister get refuge status. She says she doesn't. She wants her sister to leave. Now at this point, I'm thoroughly confused. So I get her to elaborate. Turns out her sister is visiting and, to quote her, she is ruining the family. Her sister has threatened to stay on after her visa expires. And this lady wants to know whether she can actually do that. The short answer, no legal advice required, is that she can't just stay. She has to go through immigration. So she asks what to do about her. I tell her, if she doesn't leave when her visa expires, call the cops. She says thanks and hangs up. I dissolve into fits of giggles. Story 35. My 14-year-old son was assaulted whilst playing soccer at an official club match. Adult 40-plus male coach of the opposing team didn't like that they were losing. Ran onto the pitch and kicked my son violently to the ground, requiring a trip to the hospital. Piece of crap lawyered up to save his arse. Probably given he's a school principal. What piece of shit lawyer defends smug scum like that? Story 36. Not an attorney, but worked several years as the case manager for a circuit court chief judge whom was over several counties. It's a toss-up, really, from my days doing in home, or the ones I heard while directly employed by the judicial system. One, there was the mom and dad who charged anywhere from $25, $200 a pop to recorded their children, while then they sold the recordings online for more money. All filmed. She used a tripod camera to record. Her husband, the kid's stepdad, came home one day and found them all. He beat them for cheating with his wife, and while drunk one night showed someone the film. He was charged with the assaults, despite the kids saying he didn't film them or abuse them personally, but had their older cousin. Anyway, mom claimed that husband, stepdad, was abusive and made her perform these acts. Kids were too young to testify or to put through testimony. No gal was appointed in the criminal action. Anyway, he got like 10, 12 years, and mom served 6 months for indecent exposure, a singular count. We had the family court case. The kids hated her. When the mom filed a motion for return, the children were so scared they'd be made to return to her, they all tried to escape in various fashions. Thankfully, none of the 3 were successful. Story 37. Now, but personally involved in this horrific case. The travesty of justice was a contributing factor to me dropping out of pre-law in college. Adding a spoiler tag, because this is pretty bad. If there is a trigger warning, assume it applies. In the late 88s, my uncle was convicted of abuses, myself and my youngest sister being 2 of the victims. During the case, my mother screamed multiple times that we were liars, especially when I testified, and trying to ruin his life. It got to the point where the judge asked her to quiet down or leave the courtroom. A majority of the victims on record were dead or imprisoned for substances use. 2 Boy Scout troops were found to have all been victimized. The church was very involved in his defense, as he was an elder of the church. We lured him away from the path of God, and he couldn't tell right from wrong. He was sentenced to 6 months in a mental hospital. He got out in 3 after finding religion. Even though he was an elder of the church, his hoarder apartment had to be cleaned out by me, aka one of his victims. His bank accounts were non-existent. Despite me supplying evidence, they were opened under false names. My mother repeatedly told police I was lying, despite her brother's own confession in court. She ended up cleaning out my bank accounts, after already draining them bit by bit over the years, and giving him and the church the money because I ruined his life. And she welcomed him back into her home, where he continued to abuse my sister until she moved out. Story 38. I didn't work on it, but I was in the courtroom at the time with other cases, working with the DA during my first year in law school, being presided by the biggest prick judge I've ever encountered in my life. It's not shocking like everyone else, but I think it's pretty bad. This couple broke up, and the woman got a restraining order on this guy. A month or 2 later, this guy goes out with his friends to some bar. Later in the night, the ex-girlfriend shows up at the same bar. The guy goes up to her and says, "I know you have a restraining order against me. Are you comfortable with me here, or should I leave? I won't bother you either way." She says she doesn't want him around, so he leaves right away. Dude got put away 3 years for that. You aren't supposed to be within 100 feet or have any contact with the person who filed. So the fact this guy said that one sentence to her got him put away 3 years, even though he was there first and trying to be courteous by asking and then leaving right away. This was very beginning of my law career and already not a good sign, lol. I hate being a lawyer so much. I learned coding if anyone's hiring. Story 39. I'm not a lawyer, but I went to a preliminary hearing once for a 16-year-old getting hit with a murder charge. Basically, the 16-year-old, who looked like he was 30, was getting charged as an adult for attempting to buy quite a bit of pot off of some dealer. The dealer tried to rip him off by stuffing the package with cereal instead of actual pot. Kid opened the box at the deal, saw he was getting burned, and shot the dealer. A boy fled to his half-brother's house until the police found him. Police interrogated the kid, and he confessed to everything. Real fucked up thing was that the court threw out the police interrogation as evidence because minors have to have a parent or a legal guardian present when getting questioned by cops. The kid didn't have a legal guardian. Nobody knew where his father was, and his mother lived in another state, 400 miles away. The kid had been living with his half-brother in a house with like 7 other people for the last few months. Story 40. Legal assistant here. Worked on a case where a male nurse assaulted bedridden patients at a low-income nursing home. Absolutely horrifying. One of the women had a hip fracture. Worst part is that they complained to staff and no one listened to them for the longest time because they were old and didn't have a lot of family. Yet we represented the women and were suing the nursing home, and in our research uncovered tons of other lawsuits across the country alleging all sorts of negligence at other nursing homes run by the parent company called Sava Senior Care, if anyone wants to know where to never send their older relatives. Story 41. A bit different from some of the posts on here. Not me, but a friend from law school went on to work on a Holocaust denial case. He was taking witness statements from survivors to prove they were there. Many of them could simply roll up their sleeve and show him their prisoner number tattooed onto their arm. It was pretty compelling evidence. Story 42. Periphery of a divorce. anesthesiologist and his wife. Dude has tons of money and a huge secondary stash of gold and other non-currency assets that he doesn't disclose. Keeps lowballing wife, and she keeps arguing for the proper financial disclosure. He laughs as she has to keep paying for her attorney to file to get access to the assets that he won't disclose and they can't prove. He kept lowballing her and refusing to settle all while he continues to make huge money. And she struggles. He wanted to win and make her suffer and drag it out divorce initiated because of his infidelity. Story 43. Worked at a big law company in my country, mostly corporate law, so not much action in court, but once we had this pretty wealthy client who ran a bunch of nightclubs and massage parlors, which were actually brothels disguised and had other adult entertainment ventures, really professional on running his business, had set up a pretty sophisticated corporate structure for paying the least taxes as possible and seeming as legit as possible, although for all purposes was a glorified pimp. He was also father to something like 10 kids, which were used as his sons as straw man. I believe that's the right term in English. One of those kids was a pretty heavy addict and would always give us trouble when we needed any documents signed. After all the trouble he gave us, my pimp client was fed up with his son's screw-ups and wanted to settle with him to give all his equity to his other sons without any fuzz. We arranged a meeting so we could discuss and hopefully define terms to the agreement. Instead of that, we had a disaster with our client and his sons so much, they physically fought each other on the meeting room, and soon my client got hit by all legal and administrative measures. His son's lawyer, one of those sleazy ones, could think of. I spent nearly 1 year cleaning up this mess, fighting nonsense allegations from extortion and embezzlement to money laundering and criminal affiliation for my client, which by the end of everything wanted to pay us in escort services. Story 44. I got plenty because I work in child protection, but in appeals, so I don't see the worst of the worst. Important for this is that in my jurisdiction, a lot of the lawyers who defend parents are contract attorneys who get paid very little and don't always follow best practices. A lot of what we see are arguments based off the transcript without reference to the trial exhibits. I recently learned that this is common practice in criminal appeals, but in severance, the exhibits are usually pretty crucial. Got an opening brief in saying that mom didn't actually neglect the kids. Pretty standard ob stuff. Mom got pulled over for expired tags. Kids are in the car. Cops end up searching. I forget the reason, not important. Find met and a pipe. Still pretty standard. During the stop and arrest, cops pull the kids out of the car and find that 2-year-old daughter has a rather old diaper on. When they go to change her, they find what the examining doctor later called the worst case of diaper rash he'd ever seen. But there were pictures. I can't say it was anything less than jungle rot. No person who saw that could say the child wasn't neglected. Needless to say, I cited to those pictures very liberally in my answering brief. Severance was affirmed. Story 45. I've seen robberies, assaults, abuses, you name it, but nothing scares me like the failures of the system like this. Basically, this woman was beaten 20 times, including 10 times in the back of the neck and into the skull. The police convinced the medical examiner to determine the case a lady died on her own, because the door was latched from the inside when the body was found. But here's the kicker. The only person who told the police that the door was latched when they found the body, when the police arrived, the door was open and the body was already discovered, was the fiancé. You know, the person who in any other investigation anywhere would be the prime suspect. So basically, the cops took the word of the person who should be the prime suspect to determine that this woman who was beaten 20 times, including from behind into her brain, died on her own? What a damn joke. Story 46. This will get buried, but even lawyers have feelings sometimes, and I really need to get this one off my chest. I work migration law, to be precise, family reunification for unaccompanied refugee minors. My job is to help the parents and siblings with the legal procedures so they can come live here too. Pandemic really f***ed up most of my cases because it became impossible to, for example, make appointments at a Dutch embassy. Everything, and I mean everything, was delayed by months at least. This one family had made it through the legal proceedings and got the green light to pick up their travel papers at the nearest embassy. Then the delay came. One day after the original appointment would have been their son was kidnapped for ransom. They tried for weeks to find enough money but failed. One morning I opened my messages and saw the video of the boy die. That boy was so scared, he soiled himself while talking. Not a day goes by that I not see his face in my mind's eye. Not a night goes by without seeing him in my dreams. The family needed someone to blame and blamed me. If only I could have brought them to safety sooner. The most painful part is that were the embassies not closed, they would have been safe by now. Instead, they still live this hell far away, still waiting their turn to be able to go to the embassy and take a flight over here. Story 47. Client gets married to a college grad who went to school on a baseball scholarship, but the guy got injured so he couldn't work. So client supports the guy for 8 years while he deals with the pain and gets disability. Client calls guy's dad for an unrelated matter. Dad says Guy has never been to college and never played baseball and was never injured. After client confronts Guy, Guy steals client's inheritance and leaves the state and leaves his 2 kids with client. Don't be like Guy. Story 48. My sister is a criminal defense lawyer. She told me about a case where this guy had committed murder and after a week couldn't take the guilt and handed himself in. Only when he got to the police station and confessed, they asked him where he killed this woman. He told them and they said it was out of their jurisdiction and to go to another police station to confess because it was closer to where the crime happened. So he left and went the next day instead. No one looked for him or asked or anything. It went completely unreported. He did hand himself into the police station and they began to start proceedings for a case against him. They wanted to include on the report the fact he had been turned away from the police station and still handed himself in to show some sort of character. But the judge and police said they wouldn't allow it because it makes them look bad. They said they wouldn't let the jury even hear about it. My sister's team was frustrated and horrified. This was in Ireland. Story 49. I didn't work this case. It is a personal story and the reason I became a lawyer. I won't go into too much detail. My half-sister was bitten, beaten, and bruised by her mother her entire life. My dad tried for years to get custody, but was never able to. Everything was very well documented. There were photos of the injuries, examinations where doctors attested the domestic violence, testimony from various witnesses. But the mother's family was too influential in that town, and the judge sat on the case doing whatever was needed to stall it. 8 years I was unable to see my sister, while she was basically being tortured daily. 8 years. At some point, the mother got converted to some religion and stopped with the physical abuse. But the mental abuse continued. When my sister turned 15, she came to a bigger city to study. What her mom didn't know is that the court case follows the child. So now, this bigger city was where their case should be judged. Within 2 months of them setting foot with this new city, a judge demanded, the mother let my father see his daughter and set shared custody under penalty of asterisk going to jail if not obeyed asterisk. Very quickly, that witch called my father as if nothing ever happened, asking him to set the case out of court, which he consented to, because he only wanted access to his daughter. Since then, I have my little sister back. This happened 6 years ago. Just this month, her mother kicked her out of the house and threatened killing her because she got a tattoo. She is 21, so she finally lives with our dad now, and I wholeheartedly believe she will finally be able to be happy and make some jig out of herself, free from her mother's clutches. Story 50. Not a case I worked on, but one I had the chance to sit in the gallery and listen to. A bit of background. This particular courtroom was specifically for anti-trafficking cases, but the judge also heard civil cases. I'd gone in to serve some documents relating to a civil trial, but there was a trafficking trial going on, so I decided to sit and listen in while I waited for a break. The victim was sitting behind a screen hiding her from view of the gallery, giving evidence through an interpreter while she was undergoing cross-examination by one of 2 defense lawyers. I sat and listened while the lawyer shot questions and accused the victim of lying about her alleged incarceration and use as escorts by the people who had brought her to the country, and the victim denied the accusations as best as she could. Then, the lawyer sat down, and her partner, a man with a loud voice, stood and continued the questioning. I sort of lost track of the trial at this point as I had to answer some texts. But the next thing I knew, the poor girl behind the screen was sobbing, and the judge was subtly reprimanding the lawyer for scaring her. The judge called a break then, and I was able to serve my documents and leave. I don't think I'll ever forget the trial or the way that girl cried for the rest of my life. It was heartbreaking. Story 51? Well, worked in family court many years, so picking one is hard. But I did have one many years ago in which I was assigned to represent the father. He was charged with abusing 2 of his 5 daughters. As is often and sadly the case, the mom sided with dad and didn't believe the girls. It was really hard to get the girls to come to court and testify. Only the oldest finally agreed. She came to court like 5 times, and each time she had to sit in the waiting area where her mom and dad were sitting. She was in foster care, and it was extremely traumatic for her. She was 13 at the time. However, the judge hearing the case was a complete jackass, and she always booked too many cases, and so many got adjourned without even being heard. This happened on this case all 5 times. This young lady came to court, and then she finally stopped coming. It was just too much for her. However, without her testimony, the case was dismissed. To this day, I remember the revolting feeling I had watching that lunatic leave the building with his arm around the mom and 3 younger daughters with him. The only upside is that enough of us complained about the judge when it was time for her reappointment, and she was denied. Story 52. During law school, I clerked with the public defender's office. I was working on a homicide case where our client beat his wife to crap. Then he got in his car, recorded all his calls, and called all of his family and friends to tell them that he just killed his wife. He had no remorse and told everyone how happy he was that the git was dead. This experience, along with defending child abuser, made he realize that I did not want to do criminal defense work. However, I do really respect those attorneys. They have an incredibly difficult jobs that is necessary for our justice system to function, but most people hate them for it. Story 53. There were cases in the UK during the Falklands War in the 80s where the government claimed bullet wounds and lost limbs due to minefields were incidental injuries and not related to the fighting. Like people just randomly generate holes in their chests, etc. The government's own records showed they were buying time in order that the claimants would hopefully die of their injuries and the cases could be shut down. Story 54. Not me, but a sibling. My sibling represented a local teacher who had an affair with a student. The teacher was 100% guilty, so my sibling focused on a plea deal instead of having to go to trial. In the end, the teacher pled guilty, served jail time, lost teaching license, and there were additional requirements. I'm not really sure how my sibling ended up representing the teacher because I never would have touched that case if I was an attorney. I know it really tore my sibling up because I'm teacher. We have a sister who is a teacher, our mom is a teacher, and many other family members work in schools. Story 55. Boys at a campout dared one another to perform dirty things for a 4-night pack. One of the boys who did not participate reported it to his parents. State police got involved along with conservation police. Interviews were conducted of the minors. Parents of the boy that been like victim didn't want us to charge it. One was a prominent realtor. Since they were all minors and no force was used, we wouldn't accomplish much anyway, so after reviewing all the evidence, I declined to charge it. Fortnight had a certain meaning after that one in my office. I kept my boss in the loop because while I primarily handled juvenile cases, he did most of the sex cases. People in the courthouse would give us weird looks when we said someone needed to go play Fortnite. Must be a good game. I'm afraid to try it now, but I heard one of the judges likes it. Story 56. Not a lawyer and found this out while hearing it decades after the fact. Anyways, it's technically my dad's story anyway, so I'll count it. He's just a 19-year-old closing up the pizza place he works at with one other guy there when these two other dudes come in and order a pizza. My dad's annoyed because they're closing up, but goes to make one when the guy then orders them to open the cash register. They do and give the guys all the money. You'd think it'd be the end of it, but no. They then take my dad and his coworker to the bathrooms and then ordered them to put their faces to the ground. My dad's coworker does so and is shot in the back of the head. My dad doesn't, and instead jumps for safety and the bullets graze, but otherwise don't really hit him. He lay there while the guy stood over him, and by some act of mercy from above, the guy thought my dad was dead. He and his accomplice then left in my dad's car. My dad went to the police a block away, and the guys were caught. I only found this part out after hearing it, but the judge who was presiding over the trial said it was one of, if not the most shocking case he ever presided over. Story 57. My brother interned at a firm that was acting as the public defender for a high-profile case in our city. An entire family slaughtered, with only one individual remaining. This family had a laundry list of weird shit going on. The father lived in a caravan. The eldest daughter was escorts, and it was rumored the father was abused daughter. They lived in relative poverty. The sole survivor was convicted, and then had his conviction overturned a year before he was due for parole due to bad chains of evidence on some items and police moving a couple of items before taking crime scene photos. Local, national belief is that he definitely did it, but got off on some technicalities. He is married and has a couple of kids now living in a different country. Safe to say, he won't be stepping a toe out of line, because if he does, law enforcement will come down on him like a ton of bricks. Story 58. A car crash. The defendant thought he was not at fault because he was having seizures, passing out due to one. The screens and vehicles are two. Carbon monoxide. In the end on cross, he admitted that the car crossed the dotted lines, but he didn't do it. It was the car. It was kind of sad, but also frustrating. He refused to get medical help as well. Story 59. Car crash. The defendant thought he was not at fault because he was having seizures passing out due to one. The screens and vehicles are two. Carbon monoxide. In the end on cross, he admitted that the car crossed the dotted lines, but he didn't do it. It was the car. It was kind of sad, but also frustrating. He refused to get medical help as well. Story 60. 14-year-old kid abused his 8-year-old brother. Was admitted into an institution, but along with adults for obvious reasons. After days of assaulting the staff, he tried to commit escape by jumping out of the window. The reason? He didn't understand why he couldn't be near the other kids. Fast forward to the trial. The judge asks if he was aware what he did to his brother was wrong. His answer: why? My father always did it to me after that case. I wondered how many monsters grew up like these kids, but were never caught early. And when they're adults, society just wants to beat them to a pulp without knowing the context. This doesn't excuse what they did or were about to, nor every monster has this background, but it's up to us to find out and treat each case as a different case. If there was something I learned as a lawyer, is that context is everything. Story 61. I used to be an employment lawyer, and I defended someone at a tribunal who would pick on meeker women in the office and flirt with them, and over time would give them shoulder rubs. More time would pass, and eventually this guy's hands would get lower and lower until he was full on groping the girls' breasts in the office. Tough part was, he did it in such a sneaky way that all the other employees saw the shoulder rubs so suspected that they were an item so evidence didn't fall in the poor girl's favor. He won the case and told me afterwards, "I can't believe you got me off," basically admitting it. I quit law after that, lost the stomach for it. Story 62. I worked for a foreclosure firm. Our clients were the big guns. My job in particular was to notice defendants and interested parties and clear titles to proceed. One case that has always stuck with me was that in the event of underage parties, we would have to notice their guardian ad litem. I had one cross my desk in which a 16-year-old girl and her 12-year-old brother needed to be noticed. Not all too unusual. This would happen a lot with wills and such. But in this case, it took me all day to track down their representatives so I could get the notices out. As a result of my investigation, I came to find that their father had died earlier that year in a car accident and their mother from terminal illness 6 months after. They were being noticed as our firm needed to know who to sue them so that they could foreclose on their home. When I tell people I worked for the bad guys, they would always laugh, but no, really, I worked for the bad guys. Story 63. Wife arrested for domestic violence against husband multiple times. He leaves her and files for divorce. She files false police report alleging he raped her hundreds of times. He sues her for defamation. Story 64. One of my close friends is an environmental lawyer, primarily defending individual landowners in corporate cases where discharge or pollution has occurred, or where water rights are in contention. A couple years back, there was a case where a well-known manufacturer of latex paints was found to be poisoning a local wetland, a big f***ing deal in my state, with runoff, and the state authority in charge of wetlands preservation took them to court. In a grandstanding effort to demonstrate to the judge that the chemical being discharged near the water could not possibly be toxic to the wildlife, a rep for the company brought a powdered form of the chemical in and mixed it with a glass of water there and then, intending to drink it dramatically in front of the court. The glass, actually plastic but still asterisk, melted right there on the table asterisk. The case was settled out of court the same day. Story 65. Not a lawyer, but I'm a healthcare aide who had a patient. Man and woman high driving under the influence crashed into a truck on the highway, killing dad and son. Pregnant wife and baby lived. The patient was the woman wanting to sue the victims for her leg injury. Another one was a 30-some-year woman. She was paralyzed from drunk driving when she was a teenager and got into a car crash. She sued the woman that owned the car that she stole from and sued the liquor store owners for selling her liquor while she was underage. To me, she was the one who chose to buy the alcohol, steal a car, and drink and drive. I was shook that she chose to blame others for her actions. Story 66. Currently working on a case where we suspect that a mother has been abusing her 14-year-old daughter. Concerns that she has been since she was a child. Lack of hard evidence, keeping the criminal investigation from moving forward. Homeland Security finally got involved, and it looks like we're finally getting some hard evidence linking the mother to the scheme. It's not that shocking in my field, but before I worked where I work now, my mind would have been blown that people do this to their kids. Story 67. I measured and photographed my client's pen and the angle of his dangle to prove the Karen was lying when she said he exposed himself through his front window every day. We won the case using an accident reconstructionist who testified given the height of the window. The client's height, she couldn't have seen it. It was during that testimony that I realized that I had completely misunderstood the expert's instructions on what needed to be measured. Story 68. One of my first cases as a law clerk involved me taking pictures of everything a 54-year-old woman had in her possession when a semi failed to stop at a light and rear-ended her going 50 miles per hour. As you can imagine, she was died instantly. But her things, they broke me. Just a wonderful grandmother on her way to her job as a nurse. Pictures of her grandchildren, her lunch, a keychain that said, "Every day is a gift from God," really puts in perspective how quickly life can end. We blew the doors off the semi-company and it felt good. Story 69. Domestic abuse cases. Currently working on one that took place over a span of 1 decade of beatings, molestation, financial abuse, etc. The victim decided to speak out now because it got really bad in the past few months, and she's genuinely scared for her life now. The details almost made me cry in front of the client. Story 70. I wasn't actually working on this case, but the one that sticks in my mind was the 3rd murder trial of a serial killer case. Dude mutilated his victims. I remember the prosecution saying they found some bloodied clothing at the scene. The odds of it being a blood sample from anyone but the offender were 1-625-0000000. Long story short, whole of life tariff. Story 72. Mom is an attorney and has seen some crazy shit. But her craziest stories come from when we lived in Tahoe. She worked at one of the only major law firms in the county, so they worked on a variety of cases. I've heard her talk about a lot of cases dealing with naked people, and one time a guy came in with his arm as proof he lost his arm in a work accident.